more. Now the second system, very important, is the Global Digital Health Certificate, popularly called Vaccine Passports. Now this is very important. Now, this news item tells us that the European Commission and World Health Organization launched landmark, hear the name, landmark digital health initiative to strengthen global health security. Now, we've been making this point that God made us as both physical and moral beings. So the whole system, the whole takeover system is both physical and moral. So this is the physical system. This is the physical system that deals with the physical being, and it is the World Health Organization who is doing all the dirty work. And so World Health Organization and the European Union launched this global digital health system. And let's watch this video to affirm it.
It's a great pleasure to be part of this signing ceremony for the WHO Global Digital Health Certification Network uptake ceremony. You know, a warm welcome specifically to our European Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, Mrs. Stella Kyriakides. A warm welcome also to Ms. Sandra Galina, Director General DG Santé, and her team. We have with us from WHO side our Director General, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, and our Chef de Cabinet, Razia Pense. I think without further ado, I would like to give the floor for introductory remarks to Dr. Tedros. Please, Dr. Tedros, you have the floor.
Thank you, Katarina. Your Excellency, Commissioner Stella Kyriakides, and Director General Sandra Galina, dear colleagues and friends. Thank you for joining us today, and I also acknowledge Commissioner Thierry Breton and Director General Roberto Viola, who could unfortunately not be with us today. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the value of digital health solutions in facilitating access to health services. While the emergency phase of the COVID-19 pandemic is now over, investments in digital infrastructure remain an important resource for health systems and for economies and societies at large. Like many countries, the European Union made significant investments in COVID-19 certificates to help people move around as safely as possible during the pandemic. The European Union's certification system was used by all 27 EU member states and more than 50 other countries. Building on the success of the EU system, WHO is proud today to launch the Global Digital Health Certification Network. So thank you so much to European Union for the excellent certification system that you have transferred to us, and we have the chance to build on it. WHO will begin operations of the network today with the existing COVID-19 certificate as a global public good. Soon after, we will expand this infrastructure by incorporating other use, such as a digitized international certificate of vaccination, routine immunization cards, and international patient summaries. WHO will continue to work with all regions to ensure that the network is accessible globally, incorporating relevant experiences and standards from other countries and regions. It's important to emphasize that privacy is key. WHO will not have any access to any personal health data. We will only maintain a directory of the public keys that can be used to verify the authenticity of a member state's digital health records. The Global Digital Health Certification Network will be an important part of our efforts to strengthen health systems and support our member states to prepare better for the next epidemic or pandemic. The network could also play a crucial role in cross-border humanitarian situations. by ensuring people have access to their health records and credentials as they move across borders due to conflict, the climate crisis, and other emergencies. WHO would like to thank again the European Commission for its partnership and support, and for advocating the EU member states and other participants that they migrate to the WHO network. I also thank the EU and WHO teams who worked hard to bring us to this moment. We very much value the European Commission's technical and financial support.
In fact, hitherto, the G20 met last year in Indonesia, and then they proposed it. In fact, the G20, in other words, reaffirmed it. And they said, basically, that is the way to go. And that, in fact, the science is settled. We have nothing to argue. Once the world decides, you have to comply. So let's hear Ingraham and what he said about this whole control system.
I'm Laura Ingram, and this is the Ingram Angle from Washington tonight. The big vax passport push. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Now, when Joe Biden travels to meet with world leaders, it is a virtual certainty that he will agree to something that undermines U.S. sovereignty and, of course, picks our pockets. And that is exactly what happened at the G20 late last week. Emerging from the Indonesia confab, Biden, along with the rest of the group of 20 nations, released a declaration supporting the development of digital health certificates, otherwise known as vaccine passports. Now, you may recall that the Angle warned about this eventuality back in the spring of 2020. Bill Gates, the Gates Foundation, are in favor of developing digital certificates that would certify that individuals, American citizens, have an immunity to this virus and potentially other viruses going forward to then facilitate travel and work and so forth.
I'm very concerned about the slippery slope in terms of continuing encroachments on personal liberty.
Well, Bill Barr was 100% correct. The ultimate goal is control. But what they promise is that these digital IDs will end up facilitating international travel. And of course, it includes proof of vaccination. Translation: as long as a Democrat is president, he or she will allow the World Health Organization to dictate how we share our most private health information. And of course, creating a central database is going to be necessary, they claim, for the greater good, for your protection, and of course for your overall benefit. But what if you aren't shot up with whatever they claim is necessary at any given time? Well, tough luck, stay home. Because you're in a WHO-mandated lockdown. No travel for you. Now, the declaration also calls for the establishment of a trusted global digital health network. Doesn't that sound nifty? To prevent and respond to future pandemics. Now, the language here is broad enough to invite all sorts of mischief and intrusions into your personal data. So what could possibly go wrong, right? Well, of course, they don't see the irony in the fact that China similarly justifies its own moves to crush personal liberty with cruel lockdowns of millions of its citizens at any time an outbreak happens. The CCP orders lockdowns like college kids order pizza. Now, just today in Beijing, they announced that they were shutting businesses and schools in hard-hit districts and tightening rules for entering the city as infections ticked higher. That's in Beijing. Now, to give you some perspective, only 3 people in a city of nearly 22 million have died from COVID since Saturday. So they're tightening their controls in their central Henan province and Chongqing in the southwest as well. And the personal accounts of life under these lockdowns, they have been harrowing, actually terrifying.
Cannot go anywhere. Everything's closed. Customers cannot come either. What can you do? You can do nothing.
How sad it is that we have an American president who agrees to a declaration that doesn't condemn this type of subjugation of human liberty and, in fact, implicitly validates it. Because, of course, China is the master at using these digital health passports to stop perfectly healthy people from traveling, using the pretext here of COVID. Now, this is sick and it's twisted, but it's completely predictable. Like so much of what happens in China, and our elites, well, of course, they simply just look the other way. If anything, we're edging closer to the CCP's model, not moving further away from it. And by the way, they clean up the language to make it all sound so pleasant.
My argument has been that there are enormous benefits to be gained from that global integration.
We have to recognize the severity of the problem with refugees, and right now with COVID-19, that argues for vaccination, for availability and access for everyone, because we're all living on the same planet.
Progressively, a lot of people would like to see there are two orders in this world. This is a huge mistake, even for both the US and China. We need a single global order.
A single global order. And where exactly does that leave the nation state? Well, you guessed it, on the trash heap. This is why they all hate Trump so much, because back in 2016, he was the first major presidential candidate to call this out since really Pat Buchanan. But their fantasy, again, it sounds like this.
What we will see is that everything will be integrated into an ecosystem driven by big data and driven particularly by close cooperation also of governments with business, civil society. And this revolution will come at a breathtaking speed. It will be like a tsunami.
It will be like a tsunami. And when COVID hit like a tsunami, Schwab saw his opening, declaring in the early months of the pandemic that the world must act swiftly and jointly to revamp all aspects of our societies and our economies. And we know what followed. The shuttering of churches and schools, masking toddlers, mandating vaccines, and now, looks like requiring vaccine passports for travel.
Let's have a digital health certificate acknowledged by WHO if you have been vaccinated or tested properly, then you can move around. So for the next pandemic, instead of stopping the movement of the people 100%, you can still provide some movement of the people.
Some movement of the people. And it's not just your movement the government wants to restrict. It's your financial privacy and freedom as well. Now, back in March, Biden signed an executive order announcing what is his obvious desire to pursue a digital dollar to eventually replace cash altogether, claiming, of course, that the goal is to facilitate easier transfers of money, easier payment systems, and capital flows in the international financial system. Again, sounds kind of cool, right? Well, nothing good's going to come of this. Tracking your health data to tracking your finances, it's all of a piece. The key issue here is whether Americans are going to make their own decisions about important issues, or are we just going to farm them all out to international organizations? We've already established that the left basically hates the American system, so of course they're all too happy to allow other countries boss us around as much as possible. But the goal is always to keep our voters on the sidelines, away from the levers of power. And of course, China and Europe, they're fine with this. Now that their midterms are over, Biden and John Kerry felt emboldened not only to agree to these vaccine passports, but to commit our taxpayers to spending billions of dollars for climate equity payments to emerging nations.
And it's very important to note that prior to this whole digital health certificate, which is to take away people's health freedom, you no longer have the chance to decide what is to go into your body. You have no freedom. So the pandemic treaty is to take away universal freedom as far as the human being is concerned. The global digital health certificate is to take away every single person's individual health freedom. That is why we said it is all about control. Control. It is to take away your freedom. You have no right to choose. Michael Eden, who happens to be a former Pfizer boss, warned us back in 2021. He warned us that this is where it is heading towards. And by the time we get there, your liberty of choice, as far as your physical body is concerned, is done. And this is what has been launched. And this is what is to be implemented. Let's hear him speak. Very, 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 very thoughtful. Let's hear Michael Udin.
This idea, for example, that you can be ill even though you have no symptoms, and you can be a respiratory virus threat to someone else even though you have no symptoms, that's also invented in 2020. There's simply no history of it, and it defies common sense as well. I'm paying to do this, right? I have lost work. I have had people I've known for decades no longer want to speak to me. I am very sincere in what I'm doing. I'm warning you that governments around the world, and certainly yours locally, is lying to you in various ways that are easy for you to establish. If you choose not to do that, there's nothing someone like me can do about it, okay? You've been subject to propaganda and lies by people who are very well trained in how they do that, and I'm a complete amateur. So I'm simply telling you that if you want to check any one of the things I have said, you will find it to be true. And I would point out to you that if you find one thing your government has said which is clearly not true, I ask you this: why would you believe anything else they've told you? Once you've been infected, you're immune. There's no uncertainty about it. It's been studied hundreds of times now. Lots of literature has been published. So once you've been infected, often you'll have no symptoms. You are now immune, probably for decades. It's simply not true that the variants that it throws off as it replicates are sufficiently different from each other to represent any threat at all. It's not even unlikely, it's impossible based on the thousands and thousands of variants that have been formed. They're all very, very similar to the original. In fact, I joke about them and call them samients because they're so similar, you might as well see them as the same. So you've been infected, you'll mostly survive unless you're very close to death anyway. You're then immune possibly for life. It's not true that the variants represent any kind of threat. It's not true that you need a top-up vaccine. Most of you don't need a vaccine at all. Most of you would be well advised to stay away from experimental vaccines, unfortunately, that do come with a blood clot risk. Why would you take a risk with your health for something that's not a threat to you? So when your government lies to you once or twice, we're probably quite used to politicians occasionally telling white lies, and we kind of let them. But when they lie to you about something technical, something that you can check, and they do so repeatedly over months, and they do it over many, many elements of the same event, please, you've got to believe me. They're not telling the truth. And if they're not telling the truth, that means there's something else afoot. And I'm here today to tell you that there is something very, very bad happening. And if you don't pay attention, you will soon lose any chance to do anything about it. And don't say you weren't warned, because I've been warning people as long as I can and as hard as I can, that you can still, right now, take your normal society back. You can take it back tomorrow. You don't need masks, they don't work. Forget lockdowns, they never slowed transmission, which took place mostly in institutions like hospitals and care homes. You don't need to be vaccinated by inadequately tested and somewhat dangerous gene-based spike protein inducing proteins, and you don't need to do what you're told by corrupt scientists who are apparently advising our government. If you don't do that in the next few weeks, it will be over. I believe if we get to a point of a so-called vaccine passport, I think you will have lost the chance to take it back and you will regret it.
Having said that, and seeing how the world is taking over the financial freedom of people, what is the next thing? The next control or persecuting system is the central bank digital currency.